This is Dr. Kraus again, and this is part two of the videos on the institutions of Israel. In this one, I'd like to talk about the holy days of Israel. We don't always think of holy days or holidays as institutions, but they really are, and these were very important for the life and the daily, even yearly, but daily understanding of Israel and who they were as people of God. So let me look just briefly at the third of these things I want to talk about, the holy days of Israel. And to start, there were three important pilgrimage festivals. These are sometimes called solemn feasts or solemn assemblies. You see these in Deuteronomy. It says 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose. And this is assumed to be the temple in Jerusalem. And here they are, at the festival of unleavened bread, at the festival of weeks, and at the festival of booths. They shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. All shall give as they are able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God that he has given to you. So 3 times a year, all of the uh, male Israelites, at least, and sometimes the females too, if they could, they would go to Jerusalem to celebrate these holidays. In understanding this, I'm going to look a little bit at this idea of the Jewish calendar, the 12 months in the Jewish calendar. Now, they use a lunar calendar, or they did in those days, which doesn't exactly match up with our months. We use a solar calendar. So a lunar month is only about 28, 29 days long, and it gets off, and they have to do some corrective things for it. But so when we compare this to our months, the months in our calendar, it's not an exact comparison, but we'll try to do that. So what were these three pilgrimage festivals? First, Passover, or in Hebrew, the name is Pesach. This is a celebration of the deliverance of Israel from Egyptian bondage. And associated with Passover was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Passover comes in the month of Nisan, and on the 14th day it begins and then lasts. The Feast of Unleavened Bread lasts for 7 days. In Leviticus, it talks about it this way. It says, these are the appointed festivals of the Lord, the holy convocations or solemn assemblies, which you shall celebrate at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, and this for them, the first month is Nisan, even though it's not the month that has the New Year's Day in it, but they consider it to be the first month because it's got Passover in it. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, okay, so, at the very beginning, at sundown, there shall be a Passover offering to the Lord, and on the 15th day of the same month is the festival of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So, Passover, very, very important festival for them. We mentioned when we were talking about the canon of the Old Testament that there were these 5 books that we put in the category of the great festal scrolls that were read at certain religious holidays. And I'd just like to point out that the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, is the one that's read on the Sabbath that comes during Passover. So Passover Sabbath. The second great festival is Pentecost. Pentecost is a Greek term actually that means 50 days, but the Hebrew term for it is Shavuot. Shavuot, and it comes on Sivan 6. So the 6th day of the month of Sivan, which is usually at the end of May, sometimes the beginning of June. Passover is also known as the Feast of Weeks, and it is to commemorate the giving of the law to Moses at Sinai 50 days after the Exodus. So they believed that when they left Egypt, they go through the Red Sea experience, make it through that, then they travel to Mount Sinai. It takes them 50 days, a little less than 2 months. So the giving of the law is Passover. Leviticus 23 has this to say about it. And from the day after the Sabbath, from the day on which you bring the sheaf of the elevation offering, you shall count off 7 weeks. They shall be complete. You shall count until the day after the seventh Sabbath, 50 days. Then you shall present an offering of new grain to the Lord. So 7 weeks, 7 times 7 is 49, plus one more day is 50, and that's where they get the 50 from. So it had become kind of a harvest festival, spring harvest, and they read the book of Ruth at this festival, the festival of Pentecost. The third of these great pilgrimage festivals is the Festival of Booths, which usually occurs in September or October in our calendar. The Hebrew name for this is Sukkot, and this feast is known also as the Feast of Tabernacles. So Feast of Booths, Feast of Tabernacles, all the same thing. It comes in the month of Tishri, which is, as I mentioned, is our month of September, usually sometimes October. And it is to commemorate the 40 years Israel spent in the wilderness before entering the Promised Land. So you see this description in Leviticus 23. Speak to the people of Israel, saying, on the 15th day of this 7th month, that's Tishri, and lasting 7 days, there shall be the festival of booths to the Lord. The first day shall be a holy convocation or solemn assembly, and so forth. So they're remembering that they lived in less than permanent housing during these 40 years, tents or tabernacles or booths. And what they do then is they will build you saw in that earlier picture, they will build kind of a little shelter in the backyard today. Jewish people today will build the shelter in the backyard, and they'll cover it with boughs from a tree, branches, leafy branches. In Los Angeles, they use palm branches, and the city of Los Angeles used to go around 3 times a year and trim the palm branches that need to be trimmed off of the city trees, and there would be a lot of these, and they would do this purposely during September and make these palm branches available to people who wanted them, and the Jewish people would build their booths out of them. And I know right when we left Los Angeles, some atheist was suing the city and saying you can't do that because separation of church and state. So I don't know where that came out, but I thought it was kind of cool. I had a Jewish friend one time who told me that when she grew up on the East Coast, that she said that her family had a whole set of plastic palm branches that they would, store during the year, kind of like a fake Christmas tree, and then they would bring them out and make a booth in the backyard. And they kind of camp out, and it's kind of a thing that the children enjoy. They might eat a meal out there, kind of a late summer meal. One of the festival scrolls that they would read during booths, and still do today, is the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's traditionally read on the Sabbath of the Feast of Booths. So those are the great pilgrimage festivals. I want to briefly talk about 5 other holy days of Israel, and then we'll be done. First, they had a weekly festival, and I don't think you want to underestimate this, called Sabbath or Shabbat. And we've said several times that they see the end of the day as sundown, and so since the old day is over, the new day also begins at sundown. Today, then, Sabbath begins on what we would consider to be Friday night, and Jewish people in the city will go to their synagogues, and they refer to this as going to temple, for a service of prayer and worship and reading of scripture on Friday night. This is going to temple. Some of them will do it on Saturday. They're not all the same. This is not like us going to church. It's not like that at all, really. And we shouldn't think that Sunday has somehow become the Christian Sabbath. And it's very, very different. But they will do no work on the Sabbath day. They'll eat a great meal on Saturday, but all the food is prepared ahead of time and just laid out, so it's all cold. They don't heat anything up, but really a great meal. Uh, this picture is of a rabbi blowing a shofar, a big ram's horn that signifies the beginning of Shabbat. So the other four that I want to mention quickly are annual holidays, and the first of these is Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. This also comes in the month of Tishri, the same month as the Festival of Booths or Tabernacles. This is a national day of repentance. It's considered the holiest day of the year by Jews even today, and it certainly was in the Old Testament. It's celebrated on the 10th day of Tishri, and that usually comes in September, sometimes in October. And usually it's a day where they fast all day. They'll fast for 25 hours. I'm not exactly sure why it's 25 instead of 24, but then they'll have a really big group gathering on the Day of Atonement, and it will be at the end of that will be the end of their fast. I was invited to go to one of these while I lived in Los Angeles, a Yom Kippur service at one of the big synagogues in the west side of the city, and they held their Yom Kippur service. It was too big to hold at their synagogue, so they held it at the Century Plaza Hotel in Century City in the ballroom, and there were like 1,000 people there. You had to buy a ticket, by the way, to go. The tickets were $50 or something like that. So a friend of mine gave me a ticket. She had an extra ticket, and I just got to go. And I didn't. Everybody knew I wasn't a Jew. It was kind of funny actually, but very interesting and very important for them. About the same time of year is their New Year's Day, and it doesn't come in the month of Nisan, which they consider to be the first month. It also comes in Tishri, the first day of Tishri. This is also known as the Feast of Trumpets, and the Jewish name for this is Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Hashanah. And in some big cities, this is a school off day. You know, you won't have school on Rosh Hashanah. A fourth one that really is beyond the period of the Old Testament is Hanukkah, also known as the Feast of Lights. And we see this in the New Testament in the book of John. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Festival of Lights or Feast of Lights. This is where he makes the great statement, I am the light of the world. A very dramatic statement on this during this festival. Hanukkah is a celebration of the cleansing of the temple by Judas Maccabeus in 164 BC, after it had been defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes, the Syrian Greek, who had come in and offered a pig as a sacrifice to Zeus on the altar to Jehovah in the Jerusalem temple. So Judas Maccabeus and his people retake the city, and they cleanse the temple and rededicate it, and that's the basis of Hanukkah. And it's an 8-day celebration, and they light a candle every night, and this signifies some of the things that happened with Judas Maccabeus of the time of the dedication. So you see these, actually there'll be a candelabra that holds 9 candles, and this is referred to as a menorah, and it's a very well-known and very important Jewish symbol. And the menorah comes from the temple itself. It was this big candelabra is mentioned in the Temple of Solomon, but they will have small menorahs in their own homes and light a candle each night with certain symbolism. Hanukkah Hanukkah is on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, and I passed that slide already. So the last one is the Feast of Purim, also known as the Feast of Esther. And this celebrates the deliverance of the Persian Jews by Queen Esther, which is the story of the book of Esther. It's celebrated in the month of Adar, which is usually in March, and has become, I don't know very much about this one, never been to a celebration or anything, but I'm told it's kind of like an early spring picnic, and they read the book of Esther. It's one of the megalith, one of these five festal scrolls. So they'll read the book of Esther and they celebrate the courage of this young Jewish woman. So Purim has always been very popular among Jewish women because it celebrates the bravery of Queen Esther. So these are the holy days of Israel, and altogether these are the institutions of Israel.